All animals have this problem of historical legacies, which means that they're not perfectly designed machines. But are humans particularly unfortunate with respect to our historical legacy, do you think?
Well, you know, our environment is not just a new one that we've moved into one, it's one that we've constructed. And I think one of the saddest ironies about modern human life is that we now have created for ourselves environments that even the kings of England a few centuries ago couldn't have dreamed of. Hot and cold running water, all the delicious food we want to eat, lights so we can read all night if we want to and listen to music at high volumes.